quick welcome to everyone, as I can see that people are joining us now from the waiting room. So what I'm going to do is a quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. So just to let you know up front that we are recording the session, just to make you aware of that, but also it means that if you do need to review it afterwards, or any of your colleagues that haven't seen it, it will be available fairly shortly after this. I say fairly shortly after, in terms of probably about a week or so, if not quicker. It will be available in our member area and also on our YouTube channel. So a couple of say housekeeping things to go through. Just to ask you, can you please keep your cameras and microphones off, as it helps us minimise any technical issues we may have along the way. In terms of questions, can I ask that you pop them into the chat? Whenever it comes to mind, pop the question in there. It may well be that it will be answered as we go through the presentation, but we will cover them all off at the end. So yes, please don't hesitate about asking questions, because we like to have a little bit more interaction at the end. Also to let you know that all of our market briefing sessions are accredited by the CII for CPD. So that means if the content aligns with your development plans, you can record the time spent on your CPD. So I think that means I've covered off all the bits that I need to cover off, and that leaves me the pleasure of introducing Dan and Graham from HSB, who are going to be delivering our session today on cyber insurance, reality versus myths putting SMEs at risk. So I will hand over to Dan and Graham, who will introduce themselves and get started on the briefing.
Great, thank you. And firstly, thanks for everyone for attending today. Hopefully we're not still in a sugar coma from the Easter eggs. Before we sort of crack on, I would like to briefly introduce myself and my co-presenter Graham. My name is Daniel Maskell. I currently work as the Head of Sales and Partnerships at HSB. And Graham is the Underwriting Manager for Partnerships, which basically looks after all our MGA and insurer customers. Between us, I know we don't quite look old enough. We have 60 years of insurance experience, of which 40 years of those have been served at HSB. Before we get stuck into the presentation, I'll briefly run through what the learning objectives are from today. So hopefully after attending this session, you should be able to summarise the evolving cyber risks, from ransomware to phishing scams to the rising AI-related attacks, and the financial and reputational impact they have on small businesses. You should be able to describe some of the cyber trends, including what type of incident would and wouldn't be covered under a standard policy. You should explain how cyber insurance can provide critical access to experts that can help when it's really needed, and outline some of the do's and don'ts when responding to a cyber attack, and how MGAs can support policyholders following an incident. What I really wanted to do, just to get everyone thinking at the start, was start with a question. We will answer it later on, but I just really wanted to ask you how long you think one of your typical SME customers would survive following a cyber attack. And I guess the question following that is really, have we ever discussed it with our customers? As I say, we will share this and many stats later on, but as I say, I wanted to get everyone thinking about how this can really impact our customers. On to evolving cyber risks. So cyber insurance is an evolving risk to all businesses, and in these current times, it's a crucial component of a comprehensive risk management strategy. It's an essential consideration for small and medium-sized businesses. However, there are many misconceptions and myths surrounding cyber insurance that can resultantly put SMEs at risk. Many SMEs believe that they are not targets, that they are too small for cyber attacks, or that their existing commercial combined policies provide adequate cover for cyber-related losses. However, the reality is that SMEs are often more vulnerable to cyber attacks than larger organisations, and their insurance policies may not provide the necessary cover. Over the next half an hour or so, we will explore some of the realities versus myths of cyber insurance, and highlight the importance of understanding the actual benefits and limitations of this type of insurance and why customers should consider a specialist policy. By understanding the realities versus myths of cyber insurance, you can help your customers make informed decisions about their risk management strategies and ensure that they have the necessary protection in place to mitigate the risks associated with cyber attacks. We'll also provide you with some guidance on how to navigate cyber insurance and share some global statistics. We'll also try to make these relevant by sharing some of HSB's own experience and insight from our UK customer base. Before handing back to Graham, I wanted to share some of the stats that HSB has obtained from Statista and the Cyber magazine. The internet and the government bodies are awash with statistics, and this subject seems to be the most talked about on the internet. The statistics do look scary, and often customers find it hard to make them relatable to them. From our point of view, cybercrime is increasing. Most cyber attacks do tend to start with an email. Ransomware tend to be the most detected. One thing that is clear, it's growing. So I'll quickly pass you over to Graham now. We'll start to make this relatable to SME customers.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think there's some key things we really want to draw out of this presentation, and that is really to lend our experience to this. Dan just mentioned that there's statistics are prolific out there in terms of there's that much information out there around the scale, scope of cyber risks and the impacts it can have on businesses. But we've chosen to talk about myths versus reality and focus on small businesses, really to try and lend our perspective on it. There's a number of statistics out there that say it's a big problem. That is true. They really do differ, though, in terms of, one source says one thing, one source says another thing, etc. One thing, based on our own experience that we are sure on is that it is a big problem. It does have an impact on individuals, businesses of all shapes and sizes. So we can focus in on small businesses and give you some of the perspective from our own claims experience to try and bring it to life. Because I think one of the things that I'm conscious of is that pretty much every example that you see out there that gets talked about is a large scale breach or incident that involves a large tech company. And then small businesses and individuals often think, well, that's not a problem for me. That's not a problem I can solve maybe with insurance or help and support from elsewhere. So therefore I don't have to worry about it. I just have to live with it. So I think I really want to try and draw that out in this presentation based on our own experience. And the other thing is that cyber isn't just about breaches, hacks, cyber crime. I think if you start from the sort of premise that everybody relies on information, data, computers to run their business and run their lives, actually, that it's beyond just those hacks, those, that cyber crime activity, which are a lot of the statistics just talk about. It's more about what happens if you lose a laptop or a piece of equipment fails, or basically you're in the same position in that you can't operate and run your business. So I think it's beyond crime, and it's just sort of more of a reliance of businesses and individuals and daily lives on data and computers. So if a key piece of equipment or data fails, then where does that leave you as a business? And it can be damaging, particularly for small businesses that would have difficulty in bouncing back from it. So just starting on the right with some of the statistics, that sort of myths versus reality thing that we're talking about. So UK businesses, have a cyber attack every 44 seconds. So the question is it a successful attack? Because that's a large volume, but is it a successful attack? And if so, what kind of impact it does have on a business? So as we go through, we'll look at some claims examples, and sort of say, are these statistics true? Is that backed up by our own experience in this? So if you take the view that half of businesses have experienced some kind of cybersecurity breach in the last 12 months, hold that thought. We'll have a look at our claims examples again and talk about maybe, is that backed up? What is the truth? What is the impact on a business potentially? It's believed, according to statistics, that the average attack cost an SME 65,000 around damage, assets, and loss of income. Again, is that supported by our claims experience? We'll talk about that. And again, the impact is clearly significant on small businesses, because it's believed that 60% of small companies go out of business within 6 months after a cyber attack. So I think if you're a small business and you have one of these incidents, just question how you would respond. What sort of plans have you got in place to bounce back? What would it cost you as a business? What kind of support could you get, could you access if you really needed it? So on the left-hand side, this is talking about AI. Do you know truth from reality in terms of are these AI attacks? Well, can we look to our claims experience and identify ones that have been enhanced by AI? Probably not, because that's the whole point. Would you know if something's been enhanced by AI? What is believed to be the case is that AI will certainly make things like phishing scams more prolific, more believable. And I think that's the key thing, that the phishing scam relies on how believable it is in terms of, it's that human element. Are you going to convince somebody to click on a link, or to hand over important information, or to transfer money if they've received an email or a text? One of the telltale signs of a scam is a poorly drafted email, whereas AI potentially can rewrite emails and make them more believable. You would believe that they're coming from the organisation which they say they are coming from. So have we had any AI claims examples? Truth is, we don't know, but there is a good chance that things like phishing scams are being enhanced by AI. Dan, if you want to whip it on to the next slide. Okay, so bringing it to sort of real life examples. What is HSB's customer? What's an average policyholder for HSB? And of course, no policyholder is average. They're all special and significant in their own way. And I think that's the key, is understanding your customers in terms of what are the risks, and then providing support and solutions around those risks. So from our own claims experience, top causes of claims for us are cybercrime. And there we mean transfer of funds, so phishing scams potentially, requests for payments from suppliers, from customers, and so on. The other side of cybercrime is ransomware. So systems locked out, you can't access your systems unless you put in a password or a decryption key. Further down the list is cyber breach. So systems have been breached, they've caused disruption. There has to be an investigation around that to determine what the breach is, what the impact is, what the source is, etc. And then also in the top sort of list of causes is data corruption. And it varies in terms of these types of incidents. But a typical customer for HSB might be a small business, the S of SME, so really small business in terms of majority below 1 million, but certainly below 5 million, from a variety of trades and occupancies, so shops, manufacturing, construction. The list goes on. Really, we could have listed any sort of trade or business. But again, trying to bring it back to real life examples of it's not those large tech companies, it's not Sony's, it's not those large organisations that suffer major breaches that end up in the news all the time. It's small businesses that have these incidents and do suffer significant impact as a result. So does our claims experience always reflect the statistics? Statistics say, very high frequency of incidents. I'd say our claims experience is more low frequency, but high severity in terms of when they do happen. It has a big impact on the business, really causes damage and disruption, and they really need support, from the right experts. And certainly cyber covers put experts closer to the business for when they really need it. So the average claims payments for us, cybercrime, and again, this could be fraudulent transfers, it could be support with a ransom demand, so 11,000, the average breach 22,000, or data corruption incident 11,000. So those are the averages, but for some small businesses, that fit in that sort of less than a million turnover. We've got some claims in there for 200,000. Frequency versus severity, again, severity high, frequency relatively low. And, you know, on the previous slide, it talked about an incident every 44 seconds. That's probably, you know, the frequency at which attempts are made, but whether they're actually successful and they get through or not, I think our claims experience sort of suggests that if they do get through, it's less frequent than those numbers suggest. But when they do, the numbers around what it costs a business in terms of disruption, downtime, financial loss, it's significant, and our claims experience does support that. The last element, you know, it's a variety of causes. It's generally not the sophisticated hacking incidents that people think it is. It's the human element, I think, is the biggest cause. So if you know, and that means somebody, you know, has received an email, they've done something, they've clicked on a link, you know, they've not, for example, done the very basics in terms of updating antivirus software, for example. But protection doesn't have to be sophisticated and complicated to be successful. The basic things, and we'll talk about this a bit more as we go on, but the basics can keep you well protected. You know, you don't have to spend a fortune on protection and IT security for it to be effective, because at the end of the day, it can be, you know, your systems and your protections could be as sophisticated as you want them to be. But the weakest element is the human element, potentially. So most of the claims that we see come down to that, in terms of, you know, if it is a cybercrime incident, it's somebody responding to something, it's somebody clicking on a link. So Dan, if you want to move on to the next slide, please. So in keeping with the theme, myths versus reality, so we'll rattle through some myths and sort of explain the realities around it from our perspective, of course. So my business is too small to be a target. Well, I think small businesses are often seen as low-hanging fruit. It's more of a volume thing. So if there's 100,000 emails sent out, they rely on a volume response in terms of a very small percentage of those that receive it will respond to a phishing scam, for example. The other myth, we can quickly resolve any cyber attack. Well, the evidence suggests that if they've at least thought about it beforehand and put basic protections in place, such as back up your data, that's quick, easy, cheap to do, and often results in a more robust response, because they've thought about it beforehand at least and had some kind of plan in place. And that's protected them and made it easier down the line to resolve and respond to a situation. I don't have to worry about my staff. Well, the statistics say 68% of breaches involve a human element. Again, I think that's supported by our own experience, that, you know, it relies on somebody clicking on something and doing something, as opposed to a sophisticated breach or hack into a system. Our systems are already safe. Again, the weakest link might be the human element. So systems might be safe. It might rely on, you know, for a really small business, the standard protections that come with, say, your Windows operating system, and that might be all you need. Because in fact, that's quite a good position to be in. Whereas the weakest link could potentially be, again, your staff. How are they responding to requests to make payments, etc.? How are they responding to emails that encourage them to click links, etc.? I think it really does come down to the human element there. Dan, if you just whip it onto the next slide, please. So again, small businesses, well, we don't collect sensitive data, so we don't need cover, or we don't need insurance cover around this. Well, all SMEs rely on computers and do face a cyber risk, because you look at our claims examples again, the typical small business, they're not large companies, they're not large sophisticated corporations, but they do have incidents, and they do have costly incidents. it's all relative really, because it's relative to the size of the business. Cyber insurance is expensive. It doesn't have to be. You can get cover available for as little as £100 per year. Complex security is difficult. It's not. It doesn't tend to be. Remembering a password or using a password generator is some of the the most basic things that you can do. And it is frustrating that there's so many different accounts that need a different password. So we'd always say just use a password generator. Make it more difficult than having something that's simple and easy to guess. One thing that we do here is that I need a big limit on my insurance policy. Well, I think what I would suggest is that it's more about cover that's more important than limit. So you've seen some of the examples based on small businesses with turnovers typically below £1 million. Some of the biggest claims there up to 200,000 should give you an insight to the type of limits that are probably necessary. Not all policies are made equal either, in terms of, if a policy is focused at small businesses, then in fact the cover may potentially be broader and the expectation is less in terms of how sophisticated the business is around protection. Meaning, if you're aiming at small businesses, then the policy and the cover must be designed to accept that, well, they are what they are in terms of, the level of protection that's in place and the expectations on the business to have sophisticated protections in place. So the bar, I guess, is a little bit lower. Also, if you get policies that have got bigger limits, generally, they may be aimed at larger businesses and cover is potentially less comprehensive because it's aimed at the larger business, which in theory is more sophisticated. So it's important to check the cover, look at what the cover is actually doing in terms of, if cyber crime is the biggest concern, what element of cyber crime? Is it fraudulent transfers? Not all policies that say they cover cyber crime will cover fraudulent transfers and push payment, etc. So check the cover and talk about the cover with the insurer in terms of what scenarios it's designed to pick up and what it actually responds to. Lastly, myth, all claims attract a policy excess. Not necessarily. The aim of, I think, most cyber policies is to respond quickly to an incident, with 24/7 claims lines, etc., to get that immediate support. That's the most important thing. You will incur an excess potentially down the road when cost is being incurred. But certainly initially, the important thing is to get a response, to inform the insurer, to start getting support around the incident, because the quicker the better in terms of responding to these incidents. Dan, you could just move to the next slide. So maybe a myth, why don't small businesses take out cyber insurance? Well, the statistics say that only 40% or 41% of small businesses have a cyber cover in place. That could be, misleading in terms of, is it cyber? Is it called cyber? Does it cover the risks that a small business is really exposed to, such as fraudulent transfer, system failures? I did start by saying that cyber isn't just about security breaches, etc. It can be about system failures and just loss of data and being unable to respond to an incident. So consider that carefully. So reasons why they maybe don't is cost versus benefit. So it's quite a, if again, it's a policy which is perhaps focused on larger businesses, premiums might be seen as being slightly high in relation to the premium spend of the small business on the rest of their insurances. So that might be a reason why they don't, because it's seen as a high cost. But there are policies available for small businesses that are focused on small businesses, provide the right cover and are at the right price point. So really consider what's needed and does the policy provide the protection that's necessary for a small business. So often they say, well, we don't need cyber cover because, well, we just outsource all of our IT security and IT to a third party. Well, that may be true, but if there's a failure, it's still going to cause disruption to you as a business immediately. We have had circumstances where, we outsource all of our IT to a third party, when in fact, there's been issues with that. It just by outsourcing it, you can't just forget about it and think everything's going to be okay in the event of an incident. And cyber policies will respond well to that in terms of working out what's happened, who's involved, what the chain is, where the weak links are, and kind of unravel the situation and help and support. Even though it is in theory the responsibility of those that you've outsourced it to, there's still an issue for you to resolve at the point of an incident. You've got customers to respond to. You've got, you rely on computers to generate your income, etc. You need help and support there and then. So the other one is, well, surely I've got a multi-section combined policy with 16 sections in it. That must cover cyber incidents. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that on the next slide. Don't need to read every one of those, but there's many reasons why small businesses don't buy cyber cover. Some of it might be perception rather than reality. So I'd say, consider your customers, look at the cover that they've got, look at the risks potentially around the trade and the way they operate in terms of what they could face if they had one of these cyber incidents, and how would they respond to it. Is the cover in place? Is the support in place? Just consider that carefully, I would say. And if you want to move on to the next one, please. So the point about, surely I'm a small business, I buy a comprehensive combined policy, surely that must cover all cyber incidents. Well, actually, the specific exclusions generally in commercial combined, I'll take that as an example. And that's now more clear than ever, because, a few years ago, there were some question marks over, would they cover these incidents, would they not? Because policies essentially remain silent or non-prescriptive on it. There was a big, process that the market went through to really look at those covers and to take away ambiguity, essentially, and to put more specific exclusions in around cyber. So you do need a section that adds cyber specifically, or you need a standalone policy, is the answer to that, really. If the policy has a specific section, often, again, potentially one of those myths, the suggestion is that the cover can't be as good as a standalone policy because, it's often said, well, I need to arrange a standalone policy, which will clearly be more comprehensive and specific to that business, rather than having something in a combined policy, which provides cyber cover. That isn't necessarily true. The combined policy may have a section headed cyber, but it, again, cover is more important than limit, for example, and looking at the cover is more important than anything else in terms of what does it actually cover. What are the key things that it responds to? Does it respond to cybercrime? If so, does it respond to fraudulent transfers? Does it respond to data loss? Does it respond to loss of business income as a result of a cyber incident? Look at the cover and assess against the needs of the customer and what they actually need, because it isn't always true that you need a standalone policy. You could get potentially the right cover at the right price within a combined policy, but it's all about what does it actually cover. Dan, if you want to, I think this is over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think from our point of view, what we're going to talk about on this next slide is just some of the rise of some of those trends. So I think, as Graham touched on, we are seeing now where some of those policies were silent before. Most will have an outright cyber exclusion. So it's important to understand, actually, some of the wordings may have been updated. A key thing that we're seeing now is about unsupported software being excluded and new conditions. So that's another thing to be aware of, that software houses start phasing out their support for certain software, just to be one step ahead of that and advise your customers. That's particularly relevant on sort of machinery and businesses with legacy systems and infrastructure. NHS is a key one where there's been lots in the press about them sort of running previous versions of Windows XP and that type of thing. Network, internet service provider exposures and considerations around sort of suppliers and supply chains, that's becoming more and more relevant and talked about. And again, you may well see exclusions around that. So again, just one of those things to maybe be aware of. As the boundaries get blurred, there will become new sort of products in the market. So identity theft, people are stealing people's identity, their cars, digital footprint, everything. So from that point of view, insurers are reacting to cover that. And as the boundaries of SME and personal and everything gets blurred, private customers are also looking at sort of that cyber risk to themselves. The days where people can hack into your fridge and access your Wi-Fi and everything else are becoming more and more sort of talked about in the news. So some of the stats here are from the government cyber breaches survey from 2025, and I think, okay, they don't all add up to 100%, but I think what we can certainly see is that there's a rise in phishing attacks, virus and malware, impersonating, and as Graham said earlier, AI is our friend, but it's also our enemy. So from our friend point of view, it allows the virus checkers, the software providers to try and get one step ahead and to deal with a large volume of data that they handle. But on the flip side, everything is becoming a lot more polished and slick, and AI allows sort of people that are targeting SMEs to produce volume, which it was a little bit more clunky before. Trying to make this relevant to us, as Graham said, humans are the weakest link. You can have the best systems, the best procedures in place, but if one of your staff brings in a USB stick or clicks on a link, all of that good work is undone. I think it's really then about thinking about what you do next. And as I say, we'll talk about some claims examples on the next slide, and then we'll talk about the plan and some of the things that you can do. But as I say, this sort of stuff isn't going away. I think it's going to become more and more prevalent. If you look at your junk email, you'll see hundreds of emails. Some are very obviously appalling in terms of spelling and grammar, but some are getting very, very, I guess, polished in that you really know what I have to look for in order to call those out. So again, to make some of this a little bit more relatable, I'll pass you over to Graham, who will talk about some of our sort of real life claims examples that we've got here.
Thanks, Dan. A number of examples. Again, the key theme that we wanted to draw out is we've seen a number of examples for our small business customers. Obviously, the numbers on the slide, anywhere from 2 to 100,000 as the examples. We've tried to pick out a variety just to sort of demonstrate that small businesses of all trades, sizes, shapes, sophistication, etc., have these incidents. Again, cyber is a risk for everybody: individuals, small businesses, large businesses, etc. So to draw out some of the examples in terms of the scale, variety, if you like. So some of the examples on the slide, just thousands taken from an account in 29 transactions. There's some examples here that talk about fraudulent emails sent pretending to be the insured, systems breached, emails sent to customers impersonating. So that one is an interesting one that, because there's two sides to many cyber incidents in terms of customers and businesses. So a customer of a business has a cyber exposure themselves. So if they're buying products from a business online, they have a risk. If they're interacting with the business online, they have a risk as well, in that, in theory, the business can request payment from them. They click on an email, which they think it comes from that business. It takes them to a place where they make a payment. that email might not actually be from that business in the first place. Now, if you're the business, obviously that customer is going to suggest that they've paid you. You know, they received an email from you, they responded to that email, and they made a payment to you. If you've requested payment in that way, you might, as a business, you might have nothing to do with that whatsoever. You might, the email may not have originated from your computer system. It may have nothing to do with you whatsoever. However, it might have, you know, a letterhead on it, which makes the individual think that it does originate from you and from your computer system. So firstly, they're going to suggest you've caused that. You're a small business, you've caused that. I got an email from you, I've paid it. So in terms of does a policy respond to that, generally, commercial policies protecting businesses wouldn't pay you back for that loss, because the individual is going to suggest that they've paid you. In theory, you've received the money, but in practice, you haven't. So from your perspective, it might be lost income. But in reality, it isn't. Now, where a policy can step in those circumstances is to investigate, to support that business. One, to investigate and find out whether, let's say, for example, there was a system breach, you know, maybe the email account's been hacked or something like that. Somebody's sitting in the email account watching emails coming back and forward. So the first thing you're going to want to do as a business is to work out whether that email potentially originated from you. So a policy could help and support and respond to that, because as far as you are concerned, potentially you've got a cyber breach. So investigation support, expert help to determine the cause of that potentially. It may be it's nothing to do with you. It's not a breach in your systems, but that's peace of mind then, because you've confirmed it's not come from you. There is still the issue that potentially customers suggest they've paid you, you know, they lose faith, they go elsewhere, etc. That is obviously a concern going forward. But at least you've investigated, you've had the support to investigate and find out whether it is, you know, an issue with your systems or not. So I think that was one that was worth spending a bit of time just talking about. But a whole host of different causes, different costs. You know, does it support the statistics about frequency, severity? Well, I've said, you know, from our perspective, what we see is severity, not so much frequency. But when they do happen, they're costly, they're expensive, they're disruptive. You know, they do need support. Again, because if you're a small business, where do you get the support if one of these incidents occurs? You might not have an IT company which you can fall back on. So it's important to consider that and perhaps have a plan in place ahead of time. Dan?
On that note, Graham, I'll pick up. So hopefully what's becoming very clear is that cyber insurance can offer more than just that financial protection following a cyber attack or breach. Many cyber policies provide a panel of experts and professionals, legal teams, cyber security experts that will hopefully help you respond quickly and effectively to a cyber incident. So what we've talked about here is incident response, the crisis management, forensic analysis and investigation, the data recovery and restoration, legal compliance support as well, public relations and communication support. Very often that's an important bit that we forget about, is that there's a big PR piece. Having access to these experts can be especially important for medium and small businesses. They just won't have the in-house resources or the expertise to respond to that on their own. So providing this critical support and guidance, we can help them carry on and focus on their business and get back to normal as quick as possible. So reducing that overall impact to their business. So from our point of view, why should businesses consider specialist cyber insurance? So as Graham said, the cover tends to be broader, if not the same as higher policies with higher limits, but the costs can be significantly less. So often the same price as a couple of coffees a month. The misconception is, as Graham said, is that it's worthless if it's cheap, and I'm not sure that's what most of the customers that we talked about in those claims examples would agree with. So from our point of view, why should businesses consider this cover? That financial protection. Cyber attacks can result in significant financial impact. As we said before, most businesses, or 60% of businesses, will go out of business following a cyber loss. So it's important to give that financial protection when they need it. A lot of this will come back to expertise. People just don't know what they're doing when dealing with a complicated cyber attack. So it's about giving them access to those experts, legal teams that they need in order to do things in the right order. And again, I'll touch on that a little bit later with the plans. We help as the insurer with that compliance and regulatory requirements. They will have to contact some authorities, especially if they're looking after payment information or health information or other sensitive information. The other thing to pick up on is we can't always rely on banks bailing out customers. That isn't always the case, but even if the banks do indemnify or give recompense to their customers, there's obviously other associated costs, like assessing how much to breach and how deep it is within their organization. One thing that's always important to their customers is protecting their reputation, the brand. As Graham said, even if it appears that it's coming from them as a cyber attack, it may not be. So that access to that specialist crisis containment and even that sort of forensic interpretation of or investigation to their business can really help. Business interruption, everything's costly. You're taking someone away from their day job and earning revenue to focus on something that really is out of their comfort control. So really providing this cover helps them remain on focus and sort of bringing in income and keeping that business running. The restoration and recovery, it's often not complicated. It's often very complicated, and I think one thing you need to focus on is that your systems are clean before you then restore the data. Otherwise, you're just going to get sort of stuck in a circle of doom, in that you're just going to keep getting targeted again and again. I think one thing we talked about is obviously we're talking about SME customers. I think the importance here is understand the client's businesses, what they process online, what they think their exposures are, and just if they need a more specialist product, then there are out there. But also, as we've said before, don't underestimate how good some of the embedded covers are available. So I think one of the things I really wanted to do was talk about a plan. I think the main thing is not to panic when responding to a cyber attack, and I'm going to talk for a few points. Certainly this isn't fixed. There are a few key things to do in the right order, and I think from our point of view, if you have a plan, activate that plan. If you don't have a plan, have a think, consult with some experts, understand who's doing what within your business, what you're going to do in terms of communication, and notify your insurers if you have lucky enough to have that insurance cover in place. I think from one of the things, and again, this is where consulting with the experts is take immediate action to contain or prevent the attack from spreading further, disable compromised accounts, shut down things that are vulnerable. I think the worst you want to do is pass any attack onto all of your customers, because that will really kill your reputation. I think the main thing is assess the situation, gather information about the attack, the type of attack, the systems that are affected, so that once you've got that information, you can then share with all the people that are involved. We've talked about it a lot. Communication is key, and this is where crisis containment can help, in that you will need to notify key stakeholders, employees, customers, partners. I think my view is always to be transparent. Most people want to help. As Graham said, with the amount of attacks that are happening, there's a good chance that they may have gone through this already themselves. So there will be some empathy there. But as I say, that also helps the experts to help you. Don't bury your head, or don't tell your customers to bury their head. it's best to be open and deal with the problem head on. I think look at the root cause analysis. Some of these things will be after the event as well, but notifying regulatory bodies as well. Understand your obligations. One thing that you want to do, and one thing that the insurance policy will help you do, is to avoid any pitfalls or avoid any fines that you may get. Conduct a post-incident review, assuming that everything is up and running. Again, make sure that you look and learn those lessons of the past and that you don't fall straight into the same pitfalls. Update your security measures. If it is down to someone clicking on a link or some software not being updated, then make sure that training or that you have a program in place to update. As I say, this is always a battle between us and the criminals to make sure that we're always one step ahead. So this is just trying to make it second nature. If there's any doubt, if that link or that invoice is legitimate, just try and train your staff to think about before they click on that link. I think one thing that I will emphasize a lot is response time is critical. So the faster that you can deal with these incidents and the resultant cyber attack, the less likely the damage is going to be, or the less severe the damage will be, and likelihood of further incidents. So that's the main thing to take away, really. And I think that plan, follow it all the way through to its conclusion as well. There's no point in having a plan thinking you're doing well halfway through and then deciding to go out and win some more business, and it then comes back to bite you. I'm now going to pass over to Graham, who's going to give you some quick do's and don'ts around the right support.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, I mean, that list that Dan ran through, wasn't, everything that you can do or not do, and neither's this. It's not an exhaustive list, and in theory, it's quite a long list of things you could potentially do, but that doesn't mean it has to be complicated to be effective. So, from our experience, even the most basic things, that having a plan in place, those small businesses that have at least thought about it beforehand and kind of done things to help themselves, really, because unfortunately, there isn't a magic wand that you can wave when you come in if there has been an incident to put it all right. If the customer hasn't at least helped themselves, for example, having some kind of plan in place about what they're going to do, and that plan might be, well, I've got insurance policy, so I know I can ring them and get help and support in the event of an incident. So that's one step. But other things to help themselves that are just very basic, such as backup data, that's quick, easy, cheap to do. You can even use a provider to do that, to automatically back up your computer and your data. Then if you're a victim of ransomware, so for example, you can't access your data because somebody's holding it to ransom, that means you can't operate as a business. But actually, if you've got a backup, then you can recover. You can get back up and running. And even in those circumstances, if you've got insurance, which you engage as part of that process, they can help you with that restoration and backup, because you've done the very basic thing yourself and you've had a backup of data in place, which means, well, they can't hold you to ransom if you've got the data. So that's just an example of something basic. Other things like passwords, we all hear it, and it's true. Make sure it's a bit more complicated. Perhaps use a password generator, do that kind of thing to make it more difficult. In the event of an incident, when something's happened, there's certain things you would do, like, for example, report it to the authorities, have a clear plan about responding, and fundamentally make sure your staff are aware about it, because I think there's obviously a recurring theme in this, that the weakest link is often staff, the human element, and that's not, they're not deliberately trying to do things, but you can see in those circumstances how you can easily fall victim to these, because people are busy, receiving emails all the time, inbox is full, etc. You may respond to something, and you can see how you can get into these situations quite easily. So the more you have an awareness, and more people are a bit aware of that and a bit savvy around it, the less likely they are to click on things that they shouldn't. Be patient, cooperate with the authorities, and if you've got insurance, cooperate with the insurer, obviously. And by that, what we mean is, don't try to cover things up. Be as open and as honest. We have had circumstances where people have tried to essentially, put things right that should have been dealt with. For example, patch updates, and added patch updates on top of an incident, which when you get to investigate an incident, you have to kind of roll all that back to the point of where the incident occurred, and then start to build up from there. So I guess be cooperative, don't try to cover things up. Essentially, that's what you've got, an insurance policy there for, to help with that kind of situation. Don't pay the cyber criminal. So obviously this is talking about ransom demands. This divides opinion, I always think, in that, are insurers paying ransom demands? Should you pay ransom demands? Generally no, I'd say. Our approach is help and support of customers. Paying ransoms means you're making the problem worse, essentially. You're putting them on a hit list again for, these are a business that have paid before, so they'll pay again. You're also perpetuating the problem. You're funding development of crime and these kinds of incidents. So you're essentially making the problem worse. So our approach is always help and support around those incidents. I think that, again, it's not an exhaustive list, but the key theme is, do some basic things. You can be well protected, and you should consider insurance as one of those things that you can do and that you can rely on in the event of an incident as part of your plan. Dan?
Cool. Thank you, Graham. And I think that really wraps it up today for us. I'm not going to run through all of these in to give us a little bit of time for questions at the end. But as I say, hopefully we've ticked all the learning objectives here, and that you found that a useful session. If you want any more information or any more cyber insights from HSB, there will be a QR code in the presentation that will take you through to our designated part of our website. Graham and myself will be at BIBA in May and at the MGA in July. So if there's anything you want to talk further, more than happy for you to contact us there. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Alison and any questions that everyone might have.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and particularly the fact that us humans are possibly the weaker link in this. Just having a quick look to see if there's any questions added onto the chat, but I just had one of my own. I was just wondered, as us humans are the weaker link, is there any advice that you would say to a relatively or very small SME as what they could do as their sort of priority action to help on the staff and preventing them from clicking on links?
I think if you're a really small business, there's a lot of help and support and advice available on the internet about just simply how to avoid or how to spot phishing scams. I think just looking for something like that and watching it, reading it, might help make people a bit more savvy in being able to spot these things. As I said, AI is a concern that these may become more difficult to spot going forward. But if staff are a bit more tuned into and probably a bit more suspicious about these things, as I said, again, everybody's busy and email inboxes are full, etc. People responding to emails, emails coming from within the business apparently requesting payments, etc. You might be putting a burden on a business by saying, well, did you verify this? Is it somebody you were expecting this email from? Because quite often, strangely, people respond and click text, etc., which talk about a parcel delivery, for example, and they weren't expecting a delivery. So it's just having that presence of mind in that situation to be more attuned and suspicious of these kinds of things. But of course, you can only go so far. So, you know, I think it's not a question of if you're gonna suffer an incident. It's more of when, because, you know, as I say, they're getting more sophisticated. But if you're just generally more savvy and aware of it, and you use whatever resources are available to you, you know, you don't have to pay for them. It doesn't have to be costly. But there's a lot of good advice out there that just perhaps help people think a bit more about what they're doing in their daily working life, really.
To add to that, I would just say use what you've got at your fingertips, and that very often is a virus check-in or spam email filters and that type of stuff. So a lot of these are given free to you with Microsoft, so turn those on. Invariably then, if you do unfortunately go on a website that's not legit, that's very often highlighted or blocked to you. So I think, as I say, keep your software up to date. That's where AI is working for the positive. They're continually mining all these threats that are coming and actually adding those to the unsafe senders list. So use that software that's at your fingertips. As Graham said, it doesn't have to be complicated. Very often gut feel is as good a measure as anything else. If you're not expecting a delivery, don't click on the link. If you are expecting a link but it doesn't look right, then maybe right click on the address, and if it doesn't appear to come from that entity, then maybe think twice. If in any doubt, I would say certainly when it comes to things like banks, don't use a number that's in the email or the link. Maybe contact the bank direct and ask them. That tends to be the safest option.
Thank you. I think, yeah, also if it's that important and it's genuine, they'll contact you again, won't they? So if in doubt, ignore it, because no harm can happen. So I think I'll just double check again. I think we've no questions there. So I think, yeah, there's been so much information there to take on board that there's no questions. But so you've added the QR codes in your presentation, and what we'll do is once we've had a quick edit of the recording, we'll share that with everyone who's attended and registered, as well as a copy of the slides, so you'll have all the information in there. And very quick request, I popped a link in the chat to the feedback survey, and would be very appreciative if people could save or put aside 2 to 5 minutes, no more, to have a quick review of the questions and share your feedback. So I think, yeah, that's very timely. We can, thank you again, Graham and Daniel, for your contribution and sharing your thoughts with us today.
Right, thanks everybody for listening.
Yes, and thank you everyone for attending.